different species. You can break down the word symbiotic into its prefix sym, which means life, which means together, and bio, which means life. We can describe symbiotic relationships in short as relationships that live together. So within the roles of a symbiotic relationship, there's a host and there's a symbiote. And in every relationship, they have one of these two, and they could have multiple of one or the other. The host is usually the larger organism and is the provider in the relationship. It's either providing nutrients or housing, and the symbiote is often the smallest of the two that's benefiting from the relationship. And there's 4 different types that we're going to be going over today in this presentation: mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, and competition. Varies which individuals benefit or are harmed. Mutualism is a relationship where both benefit. Commensalism is only one of the individuals benefit and the other is unaffected. Parasitism is a relationship where one individual benefits and the other is harmed. And lastly, a competition relationship, neither is benefiting. In the next slides, we'll share more in depth about each of these relationships by providing real life examples.
So the relationship that I did is mutualism. Go to the next slide. So mutualism is a symbiotic relationship that is equal for both parties. So it is a mutually beneficial relationship, and both parties benefit from the relationship, and no one party gains more than the other. A mutualistic relationship that takes place between 2 different species. So it wouldn't be like in the same species. And then an example of this would be a clownfish and a sea anemone. And I will go into more detail about that later. So what does mutualism look like for the environment? Mutualistic relationships drive ecosystem structure and function. Because 2 species are receiving benefits from this relationship, it can allow them to live and thrive in environments where they would otherwise struggle. So this can create a shift in the balance of an ecosystem and create a new apex species. By using the benefits of a mutualistic relationship, species can change their rankings on the food chain and become the dominant species in their ecosystems. An example of this would be the leafcutter ants being the dominant herbivore in a forest because of their relationships with fungi. And I will also go into more detail on that in the next slide. So some real world examples of mutualism are, as before mentioned, the clownfish and a sea anemone. The relationship between the sea anemone and the clownfish is mutually beneficial because the clownfish is able to live in the sea anemone and be protected from predators. And is also given a mucus coating that is resistant to the paralyzing factors that the anemone releases. And so it is protected and other fish are not protected from that. And then the anemone benefits from this relationship because the clownfish will attract other fish that the anemone can sting and ingest. And the clownfish also produces waste that the anemone will use as nutrients. The second example of a mutualistic relationship is the leafcutter ant and certain kinds of fungi. So the leafcutter ant colonies will farm fungi and use it as their food source. So they'll bring cut up leaves to the fungi and the fungi use it as nutrients. And then this is mutually beneficial because the ants are caring for the fungus and keeping it alive, and the fungus is used as a food source for the ants. By farming this fungus, the leafcutter ants are more of a dominant species of herbivores in their environment, which is normally like a forest.
So I did commensalism. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship or interaction in which one organism benefits while the other is unaffected. In this particular relationship, the symbiote is also known as a commensal, and it gains nutritional value, shelter, transport, and support without harming the host. These are a very rare type of interaction, but occurs amongst plants and animals. 3 different types could be plants and animals, animals to animals, and plants to plants. Plants to animals, typically the plant is the host that provides nutrients and shelter to the commensal, which could be an animal or an insect. However, plants can also be the commensal that gain nutrients from the host, which would be the soil. Animal to animal, depending on the relationship, larger animals can benefit from smaller animals, or the smaller animal can benefit from the larger animal. Commensalism relationships between 2 animal species is more commonly found in the ocean. Plants to plants, typically the plant commensal benefits from plant host only for surface shelter. The plant commensal usually receives any nutritional value from the environment, like humidity, wetness, sunlight, etc., while little to no nutrition benefit from their plant host. There are 4 types of commensalism. There's foracy, which is the commensal attaches itself to the host for short or temporary periods of time. The main purpose of the commensal is to remove any parasites, bacteria, critters, etc. from the host. This type of commensalism is typically found in the ocean as an animal-to-animal relationship. Inguinalism is the commensal uses its host as a means of shelter to reside with their species. This type of commensalism is typically found amongst birds and trees/cactuses as a plant-animal relationship. They're a long-term or permanent relationship. In metabiosis, the commensal species creates a favorable environment within the already deceased host. This is known as an interspecies relationship because the commensal thrives off the dead host. In addition, majority of these relationships are commensal bacteria, but also hermits living in shells of dead snails. In microbiota, the commensal grows or thrives inside the host as a community. In addition, the commensal provides some type of benefit to the host. This type is more commonly found in humans, in their skin, intestines, lashes, hair, etc. And it's a community benefit host. Then we have commensalism effect on the ecosystem. Commensalism does not harm the symbiote or the host. Commensalism is one of 2 symbiotic relationships that does not harm either one. However, unlike mutualism, commensalism has a benefit-harm nature, whilst mutualism has a benefit-to-benefit relationship for both the symbiote and the host. In addition, this relationship allows for scientists to study the only beneficially long-term or short-term interactions between a symbiote and a host. And it does not cost the environment any sort of backlash. Some real world examples. So we have birds and trees. The bird is the commensal and the tree is the host. The bird receives shelter from the tree, therefore benefiting. However, the tree is unaffected and therefore reinforcing the commensalism relationship. Then we have remora fish and shark. The remora fish are the commensal and the shark is the host. The remora fish receive nutritional value from removing parasites from the shark. However, the shark is unaffected by the parasite removal and therefore reinforces the commensal relationship. Moss and trees. The moss is the commensal and the tree is the host. The moss uses the tree's surface to grow and thrive on favorable conditions. However, the tree is unaffected by the moss and therefore reinforces the commensal relationship.
So I had parasitism. Parasitism is a symbiotic relationship where the symbiote both benefits and harms the host. So the host doesn't benefit at all. Parasites live either within the host or on the outside of the host. They enjoy living in hot and humid environments, and they're typically found in tropical climates. Some parasites are both pathogenic, causing either illness or infection within its hosts. A parasite's goal is not to kill its host because then they would lose the benefit from what they are gaining from the host. They only want to harm it, but not kill it, because then they won't get anything out of it. Parasites are actually more common in the natural world than one might think. With a broad spectrum of pathogenic and non-pathogenic types, parasites can be found at large throughout the ecological systems. By understanding the presence of parasites within ecological systems, this can help lead to better understanding of all the organisms found within ecological systems and the ecological system at whole. In the book Parasitism in Ecosystems, the author touches on the magnitude parasites hold within the environment by stating, "Parasites, just as microbes, remind us that small causes can have a large effect. Unless we better develop our understanding of ecological significance of the whole biodiversity, including that of parasites, we can have a sufficient understanding of the functioning of natural and managed ecosystems. By understanding parasites and how they often either go undetected throughout the environment as silent hinderers or noticed as the main source of organism harm, it is important to either notice the role within the ecosystem to help ensure the health and safety of other organisms. Parasites can be found all over in the natural world. Endoparasites are parasites that live within the host, whereas ectoparasites are ones that are found living outside the host. Tapeworms are an excellent example of endoparasites. They represent symbiosis as they live within the intestines of animals and humans. They are pathogenic parasites because they suck the nutrients out of intestines to stay alive, depriving the host of that nutrients. And then ticks, on the other hand, are a good example of ectoparasites for the same reason, as they live on the outside of the host, but they suck the nutrients through blood outside of the host, and that causes Lyme disease and other pathogenic illnesses.
Okay, so I had competition. And so competition is the struggle among different organisms for similar resources within an ecosystem. This can occur in any habitat amongst a bunch of different species. It can be in aquatic habitats, terrestrial, forests, and mountains, and it usually ends with neither species benefiting. So for the competition in nature, I chose marine wildlife and wildlife in the mountains. And so one relationship is between sea sponges and coral. And so the sea sponges are what coral need in order to survive. And so sometimes these sponges will eat away at the coral, and instead of allowing the coral to be like another organism that have like mutual relationships, they actually eat on them. And so when these sponges, when the coral is gone, there's an imbalance within the marine wildlife. And so in mountains, between hyenas and lions, they both scavenge equal prey. And so they often steal food from one another, causing hyenas to kind of attack back. And so they kill the lion's babies. And then it also just causes a lot of aggression within the wildlife. And so there's 3 different types of competition. There's interference competition, which occurs when a male species uses their aggression, usually for dominating and for mating. And so an example of this can be male gorillas that use their aggression to fight off like other gorillas from mating, or just simply from like resources within their community. And another type of competition is exploitative competition, where individuals interact directly. And this was like more of the marine wildlife and the wildlife of the hyenas and the lions. And so they often compete for resources, which can result in a superior in eliminating an inferior. So for example, the lions and the hyenas, when there's all that aggression, then the lions have a chance to kind of eliminate the hyenas from being so impacted within their ecosystem. And apparent competition is where 2 species don't directly compete for resources, and instead they are prey for the same predator. And an example of this is the relationship between hawk, mice, and squirrels. And so the mice and the squirrels live in the same ecosystem, which allow hawks to prey upon both of them. And this often ends up with one or the other having a higher chance of survival due to there being 2 different types of animals that are being hunted upon.
So a small summary over all the symbiotic relationships will be shown in the following 2 slides, starting off with mutualism and commensalism. In the picture, mutualism is demonstrated by the sea anemone and clownfish. Commensalism is demonstrated by the bird and the bison. And can you go to the next slide? And the tick is a very good example of parasitism. And during competition, two predators